Many of you will have visited my fossil collection and perhaps even read about its possible demise in the last few weeks. And the journalists who spoke to me really wanted to know how it got to be here. And none of this would have been possible without the books that I wrote about the future of technology and traveled the world telling executives about the impact that the internet, mobile phones, AI, and biotech would have on their businesses. And all the while, I was able to indulge my passion for scuba diving, for the oceans, and for fossils, and developed a vast network of connections through which I was able to put together a collection which many of you have seen. Finally, of course, much of this was consolidated into a trilogy of books called the Deep Time Trilogy, and this particular talk is about the third of those, the Beyond Extinction book. The agenda for tonight's session will cover what are possibly two of the most difficult four-letter words in the English language, life and time. But I'd also like to show you the implications of how long life has existed over massive amounts of time. And we'll investigate these four words in a little more detail. And finally, I'd like to leave you with just four surprises. So these are the characteristics of life itself. And of course, there is one final component, and that is death. Now let's have a look at life over time. Time is another one of those difficult four-letter words. Even the dictionary definitions don't really help. And in the 1980s, as we got used to Einstein's concept of time as a fourth dimension, we wondered if we would ever understand it. It's been said that we invented time just to stop everything happening at once. And recently, even physicists have got much more pragmatic about time and realized that we've had to invent words called chrononyms to make sense of particular periods of time. So I can just say to you, we're coming to see you this weekend rather than trying to be much more specific. And when we get to geologic time, it's even more important to have concepts rather than specific large volumes of time in mind. So we talk about millions and billions of years and invent terms like Jurassic and Cretaceous, really just to enable us to make sense of time. Of course, these different strata of time that represent fossil deposits over millions of years are incredibly useful for us. Without this knowledge, we would have absolutely no idea that the Earth was more than 6,000 years old, as it was believed up to 200 years ago. For the Beyond Extinction book, I wanted to create a tree of life that told the story of continuity. In other words, on one side, I wanted to show all the animal families that are alive today and trace back their history to, say, around 500 million years ago, when there was an explosion of complex life. Now, at that stage, most of the complex life lived at the bottom of the ocean. And only gradually, some of those sessile life forms moved up into the water column. Eventually, then, some of the amphibians moved onto land, and eventually some, as we know, moved into the air. At the same time, of course, some of the land-based animals moved back into the ocean. And this is the first drawing that I put together in order to create what eventually became this chart, of which several of you have already picked up a sample at the back of the room. So here we have it, the evolution of life on one chart covering more than 500 million years. Along the top, you have some of the major extinctions, and the dotted lines indicate where occasionally life went extinct. And we're going to use this to highlight these four concepts that I introduced to you earlier. And let's start with extinction, and specifically the extinction that killed off the dinosaurs and the ammonites 66 million years ago. So, each extinction creates white space into which new life can develop. There is always an explosion of evolution after an extinction. So, let's look at a few of the other innovations that really spurred evolution. Now, we have already experienced the incredible longevity of jellyfish, but they were soft-bodied animals and very susceptible to attacks by predators that were yet to come. And other invertebrates, such as nautiloids and ammonites, started developing hard shells to protect their soft bodies. And shell development is, of course, critical, but mathematically quite versatile. Just have a look at these examples. For vertebrates too, hard skeletons became an absolute fundamental evolutionary advantage. Just imagine what dinosaurs would look like without a hard skeleton. And even for humans, dad dancing will be almost impossible without the skeleton. But from our perspective, the really important thing is that hard parts make fossils. Without these fossils, we would know nothing of the history of life. Of course, our dear friend Mary Anning was one of the first to really capitalize on fossil hunting as an aid to understanding previous life forms. And we know now, of course, that she wasn't quite as old as depicted in the only picture of her. She made many of her most important discoveries when she was in her teens and in her 20s. And here we see her with her brother Joe at the age of 12, discovering the first ichthyosaur, and then at age 24, discovering a most famous plesiosaur and opening her first shop in Lyme Regis. Since then, of course, many more dramatic fossil finds have been made, and Mary's plesiosaur is dwarfed into insignificance by the giants that have been found since then. I'm often asked why there are so few shark skeletons found. And of course the answer is quite simple when we understand that sharks have a skeleton made of cartilage which does not fossilize very easily. But they do have and shed during their life hundreds of hard teeth. And that's why those are quite commonly found even of the giant megalodon shark, which had a mouth that was almost big enough to drive a small car into. Constant innovation and evolution has resulted in an amazing continuity of life over more than 500 million years. Just have a look at a few of these examples. And the Nautilus is probably the best example of this constant evolution. In this case, from straight-shelled nautiloids 500 million years ago to the animals that are still alive in the ocean today. Spectacular examples of evolution from living in shallow reef waters to now living in total darkness between 200 and 400 meters of depth. Their chambered shells and their spiral structure has been an inspiration for architects and designers for thousands of years. And you can still see fossils of those exact same Nautiluses at the ammonite pavement at Lyme Regis today. Also, you can go to the White Cliffs of Dover and see fossil sea urchins that are identical to those living in the rock pools beneath them today. Possibly the most extreme example of continuity, despite the worst that we can do, can be seen at the Bikini Atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Some of you may remember that in the 1950s, nuclear tests were done repeatedly on this single atoll. By some reckoning, these are the most violent things we've ever done to the ocean. Yet, a few years ago, a Harvard study examined the coral life on the atoll some 70 years later, and it was found to be absolutely thriving. It's just amazing the way nature has a way of recovering from everything that we do to it. In a real sense, this is what economist Josef Schumpeter described in the 1940s as creative destruction. Any radical displacement of old structures or innovations also leads to new opportunities for life in this case. Possibly the best example of this is our relationship with fossil fuels and climate change. If you look back some 300 million years, you get to a point where almost all our current deposits of fossil fuels, both coal and oil, were formed during what is called the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. And of course, for the last few hundred years, we have been using these resources, especially during the Industrial Revolution, to create the modern economy that we know today. Of course, we humans have arrived on the scene very late. It's said just 1 second before midnight in the scheme of things. And we were just the latest of the many mammal forms to have evolved. As we've used these fossil resources, we have made a significant difference to the climate on the planet. But remember that we are just the latest of many life forms to change the nature of the climate. If the dinosaurs had remained, they probably would have done dramatic damage to the planet as well. Now, if we look back over the last 500 million years, we notice that the climate change on the planet has been dramatic through many extinctions and nothing like the stable climate that mammals have enjoyed in the last 50 million years. Mammals and ourselves arrived at a time when the climate was absolutely appropriate for us to thrive in. Just think about it. Just a few million years ago, all of this was covered in water. Most of Europe was covered in the shallow sea. And just 30,000 years ago, we had a cover of 3 kilometers of ice above us, if we'd been there. Let's conclude then with 4 surprises that I think epitomize the subject that we've been discussing this evening. I hope I've showed you that whatever happens, the primal spirit of life will go on. But we are just visiting this planet. We have to remember that our future really is a matter of choice. In making that choice, I hope that I've given you a little perspective and encouraged a bit of humility. In the meantime, I would just encourage you to celebrate the amazing continuity of life.